Hi there, Michael here. You might notice that I'm not in my studio today, and the reason for that is because I happened to be in Athens at the conference, and as it turns out, Audio Brewers is in Athens, so I'm sitting here with Alejandro Cabrera from Audio Brewers in his beautiful studio, and we decided to make a little collab video where we're going to talk about all things Audio Brewers and maybe also a little bit about me. This is going to be a fun one. So, Alejandro, here we are in your studio, which is actually quite nice. And the one thing that I noticed when I entered the room is how quiet everything is in here. Can you tell us maybe a little bit what you have here and how did you manage to get that room to such a quiet state, given that we are like right outside is the main street and we are in Athens where everything is really noisy. So what did you do there?
So, for this room, I had designed a way to decouple this very room from the house. We are sitting right now in a box, and it was designed by an engineer. In which this room is 25 square meters, and I have lost 5 square meters just because I wanted to make this box isolate as much as possible from the outside. We're actually there is actually an isolation of about 70 to 75 decibels from the outside, and that is because whatever you look at, like the walls, the ceiling, and the floor are not from the house. The floor is 15 centimeters above the floor from the house. It's sitting on some sort of sponges that are absorbing the vibrations. The walls are, again, sitting on some sponges. They're using fiber panels. Each panel, I remember, was like 50 kilos. And there are 4 layers of panels in each wall. They have to be like 900 kilos heavy so that the sponge can actually absorb the vibration. Like these sponges come in colors, and depending on the color that you get, they have to get a specific amount of weight in order to work the way they are intended to. And then the ceiling is also hanging from the ceiling of the house from some sort of springs. And again, they have to have a specific weight so that they can absorb the vibrations. And the ceiling and the walls and the floor are not touching one another. They are separated completely. So whenever there is a vibration outside in the bricks of the house, this vibration is not transferred to the wall, to the room inside. And if it is transferred to the room inside, it is localized either in the ceiling or on the ground or on the walls. They don't touch each other, so there is no transfer.
And that's really something that you can really recognize because it's absolutely quiet in here, which is fascinating. I've been in a couple of studios, and we actually in our university we also have a studio that is completely decoupled because underneath the building there's the underground that kind of runs, so they had to decouple that.
Yeah.
But other than that, I've never heard a room that is that quiet, which is really interesting. Now, knowing how expensive that is, that must have been quite an investment, right?
Yeah. It was quite an investment, but to be honest, this was the dream I had all my life, was to have this sort of room. Because my background is in sampling. I have always been sampling instruments, and for sampling instruments, you really need a quiet and a dry room. And in the beginning, when Audio Brewers started, the idea was to continue sampling instruments in Ambisonics, so I needed a very quiet room. So yeah, the investment was big, but it really pays off when you have a space where you can actually work and you can hear the results exactly the way you need them.
Yeah, I mean, you make a living out of that, so it makes a lot of sense. I think for most of the hobbyists that are watching my channel in particular, though there are probably a lot more professionals that watch your channel, but for the hobbyists, this is probably unobtainable, kind of the quality that you have managed to get here. There's a lot of material also in terms of acoustic treatment, right? So you have like bass traps and all kinds of material around here. That's really fascinating. Now, You have a 7.1.4 system around here with Genelec speakers, right?
Yeah, so this is a Genelec setup. Actually, the guys from Genelec were really kind enough. Like, if you have a question whenever you want to set up your room, you just write them an email and you say, like, this is my room. Can you recommend me something? And they will actually tell you which are the best speakers for your room. So I did it based on their suggestions. They were really nice. And so I did a Genelec setup 714 in which I am running all the speakers to an RME sound card. But the height speakers, because the RME sound card doesn't have enough output, so the height speakers are going to Focusrite, which is then going digitally to the RME. everything is going to my DAW, which is a Windows machine. I track and I edit audio in Windows, but I write code in Mac. I'm more familiarized with these two systems this way.
So you're a Mac developer, yeah.
I am a Mac developer, but a Windows sound engineer. Yeah.
Yeah, but sort of you started out more as an artist, right? So was it difficult to get into programming and kind of doing your plugins and everything?
Well, I have always been into computers. I studied music originally, but then I studied sound engineering because I was so much into computers and I was always trying to, write code in my free time and everything. And when I started Audio Brewers, and then I did sampling, which is like coding, but you are coding for a specific language, which is a KSP, which is the language for contact, which is not a language, it's a scripting language. Yeah. And so afterwards, when I started Dolby Brewers, I kind of had the basic knowledge of how a language should go, the typical things of the loops, the conditionals and everything. So just moving to C++ was kind of just a transition, And so, now I do my plugins in C++.
Yeah. Now you've recently actually had quite a success. Your plugin is now part of Pro Tools, essentially. Can you maybe tell us a little bit how that went? How did you manage to get into that ecosystem?
So I have always thought that Pro Tools is king when it comes to tracking audio, right?
Don't tell that my audience because but it's actually true. Pro Tools actually did a lot of things over the last couple of months that are really right.
One thing is for sure to me is like Pro Tools is the king on studios, but it's not the king on home professionals. That is true, and I always wanted to work in Pro Tools, but the lack of Ambisonics support was really bothersome at some point. So I kind of came in contact with them, and I told them like, why don't you just add a decoder to Pro Tools? And they were like, why don't we just do something together? And I was like, absolutely, So I was working on a special version of our AB decoder HOA for it to work in Pro Tools. It's got less options than the full version of AB Decoder HOA, but it works really good because everything is automated. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to set up anything. You don't have to select a speaker layout. You just insert it and that's it. I want the sound engineer who deals with Ambisonics not to think about anything related to spherical harmonics or speaker layouts. I want just the transition to be just as smooth as possible. So this is what I ended up doing for Pro Tools, yeah.
And can we expect more with Pro Tools, or is this a one-off?
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, once again, Pro Tools actually did a lot of things right over the last couple of months. I think they are really kind of doing some fascinating strides into immersive audio, mainly the traditional setups like Dolby Atmos and Sony 360, and now the Chinese kind of version of Dolby Atmos, really, but also the Ambisonics to some extent. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing to me. Like, there are so many technologies now of immersive audio. Like, everybody wants to grab a piece of this cake, of this amazing thing that is happening to us, because right now we have the technology to actually run immersive audio cheaply with just a couple of earbuds. You can just be immersive.
Yeah.
Ambisonics is not a technology owned by anybody but mathematics,
Yeah.
And that is the beautiful thing about it, that whatever you do for Ambisonics is just going to outlive any technology that comes and goes. And that's the fascinating part. And this is the thing that I am really trying this is why I'm really trying to have everything working in Ambisonics, because I know that something that works in the sound field, it's always going to work anywhere, because it's just like, it doesn't belong to anybody. It doesn't, it just works. Yeah. It's just numbers.
Yeah, that's also the way I got into Ambisonics, sort of the mathematical, kind of my background is in mathematics. So the mathematical beauty of everything kind of is really fascinating. So sort of, there's just one way to do Ambisonics, really, right? So that makes that future-proof, and there are like a million ways of doing object-oriented immersive audio.
But what do you think about all these technologies that are coming out. Do you think that this is negative or positive for our market?
It's difficult to say. I think Pro Tools did something very interesting by allowing people who work with immersive audio to immediately switch from one format to the next. I think that was a very smart move. So if you are doing something in Pro Tools now in Dolby Atmos, you simply change the renderer, and you want to do something in what is it called, Vivid Audio, the kind of the Chinese version. You just kind of switched it over to a different renderer, and Pro Tools essentially adjusts everything so that it fixes that it makes sure that everything is kind of rendered correctly in the other format. This flexibility of changing from one format to the other, I think, helps. Given that, I think it is an advantage, right? So unless you have something that allows you to really kind of exchange formats easily, it might be problematic because everybody's doing something else. But if you have like a way to really kind of convert one to the other, I think that helps. So I personally think it's a good thing because it creates a little bit of competition and people are starting to get aware of it. And overall, I think it's a net positive.
Sometimes I think about what would have happened with stereo if there were 17 types of stereos and every type of stereo was owned by one company and everything. Wow, it's just, I wonder, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't that much what you can do with stereo, right? It's to speak, and they are kind of different binaural formats. But I don't know. I mean, I think. I mean, you can argue either way. I personally think it's more of a net positive because you need a little bit of competition in order to also figure out what is the dominant format. Only if you have that competition can consumers make the choice of what they actually prefer, right? So it's not just one format that is pushed onto them. It's something where the consumer actually can make an educated choice. And I think in the overall, I think it's a net positive. But I can fully understand if somebody thinks that's actually more of a negative development.
Yeah, you definitely have more knowledge regarding that because you're in constant contact with like students and everything. I'm like here in my studio just making plugins, so I don't really know.
I do get a lot of students contact me, not necessarily from my own program because I'm not really in a music program. We are doing game design and digital media in general, but because of my YouTube channel, I get a lot of people who contact me from other universities, and I always make myself available if a student wants to have a conversation and kind of talking to all kinds of students from all over the world. And kind of that's really interesting. And kind of they come with completely different approaches to immersive audio and different understandings of what it is. But to be perfectly honest, in a research environment, most of them are doing Ambisonics. So Ambisonics is really the research kind of format, and that is probably because of its beauty, really.
Yeah, it's just because it is. And
it
that's
is. It is. Ambisonics is. There's no but. There's nothing you can change. It is, right? So it kind of the mathematics kind of result in Ambisonics, and there is no kind of variation or anything that you can change. It is what it is. Yeah, that's true. And I guess that in the future, when computers get even more powerful and everything, all you can do is just add more orders so that it just becomes even more detailed. SSA plugins, I think they went up to 10th order. Right? Is this something you want to do?
Well, I was actually on your Discord community. I actually did a poll regarding whether somebody could be interested in working in such high order. I don't see it happening as of now. I might try to expand my upscaler just because upscaling a signal from first order to higher order Ambisonics can actually be very beneficial when you want to have details. But I'm not sure. We'll see. Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting question, right? So when is it detailed enough, right? So when is the resolution high enough that you don't get any benefit anymore? So what is the order? And I agree the 10th order is really pushing it. So unless you have like a system with hundreds of speakers,
exactly,
you're not
that's
really
true.
getting a lot of benefit out of that.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's nice. It's a nice thing to have, right? I mean, it's 10th order. Hey, cool.
Yeah. So the thing is that for the decoder that the AB Advanced Decoder that I did, which upscales your signal to seventh order and everything. I actually did like these little spots of audio where you can just beamform the audio to one specific area. And in seventh order, the spot of audio is so tiny that I just can't imagine if you're working in 10th order or above, what you will do, you know, for the spot to be like so narrow and everything. Like, it is so narrow that as soon as you get out of the spot, the sound falls so fast that it actually kind of pops, you know what I mean? This is something that I had to deal with. Like when you're in third order, in fourth order, you can actually hear that the beam is just, fading out. But in seventh order, it fades out really quickly. Yeah. So I can imagine that in 10th order, it must be like, whoop, and it just dies like that.
Interesting. That's interesting. Now, at the time we are recording this, I have not yet done a video about your advanced decoder, and I have that on my to-do list. But it's one of the things I'd like to actually spend a little bit more time because it's such a fascinating thing that you did.
Yeah,
that's your own algorithm, right?
Yeah. That is my own algorithm. I have been asked if I am following, this algorithm, or if I am, or others. My answer to that question is I don't really know because I haven't really checked on how these algorithms work. I kind of just go on my own and I'm just like, okay, how should this work? And I just do it. So maybe it follows the same philosophy, maybe it doesn't. I'm not really sure. But it works really, really well. I had the chance to test it in a very, very large room last year. And it works really, really well because there is no bleeding, which is a problem that I have always found with other decoders, that when you have a spot of audio over there, you can actually hear it in the speakers around. Here is like the spot of audio is there and that's it. There's no bleed on the side. So that's really, really cool.
That's fascinating. And you worked on it quite a while. I remember that you contacted me very early on and said, I have this thing that I'm working on and I'm very proud of it. Yeah. And then it took quite some time until you had that finished, right? So you really made sure that everything is working.
Yeah, it was painful because I remember that I wanted to release it in February 2025, and I released it in September 2025. Because when I thought that it was ready, I went to do some tests and it just didn't. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go again and I actually did 8 more months of development so that it was really,
8
really
more months. Wow.
Yeah. So that it was really, really ready and it works really, really good. Yeah. Like this is like the decoder that I use now because, the other decoders that I have are really good, but they follow the typical decoding algorithms that have, you either bleed on the sides or you either use a cardioid polar pattern, which is really wide. So, no, it doesn't work anymore. Like, it really works with the AB Advanced Decoder.
Yeah, I need to do a video about that. So kind of everybody out there, you need to kind of put me. I need to do a video about that decoder because that's really cool. That's a really cool thing. Anything we can expect from Audio Brewers in the immediate future?
Absolutely. This year, I have some plugins that I am working on that are really, really useful. I want to kind of close this gap that exists in the market, where people want to actually use like some sort of plugins that are not compatible with Ambisonics, because the way Ambisonics works, in Ambisonics you either apply the same effect to all channels or you don't. Mm-hmm. Because if you do it to one channel, you can kind of ruin the sound field. So I'm focusing on that this year. I'm focusing on offering tools to actually be able to work with the sound field without just damaging it, so that you can have like an immersive experience, like proper.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. I'm definitely gonna be sending you just so that you can check them out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always. Unfortunately, I don't always have the time because essentially my YouTube channel is really more of a side hustle, or really a kind of a hobby, really. Let's call it a hobby. But I'm always interested in kind of finding out what you're doing, because you're doing some of the most fascinating stuff around.
Thank you. Yeah, you say that your YouTube channel is a hobby, but to me, you are like the guy when it comes to immersive audio. Like, it's amazing. Like, how can you actually find the time to have a hobby that is so useful for so many people and yet have a life that has nothing to do with this?
Well, I mean, it's really a combination of things. First of all, you need to have a certain dedication to do these things. So I really enjoy doing that, and then you need to obviously also optimize what you're doing, right? So I noticed, for example, that whenever you do a video, your videos are much better produced than mine.
Oh, no.
And the reason for that is because I just don't have the time to do a complex, editing procedure or kind of figure out how to. You guys might have noticed that I very rarely use B-roll because I just don't have the time to do that. And quite frankly, I hate the B-rolls that come out of the individual kind of story blocks or whatever, repositories. I don't like to use those. So it's really a combination of making sure that everything is efficient as possible. If you've ever seen my studio, it's very simple. There's a button. I turn that button on and everything is turned on. So I don't need to kind of prepare anything, and that helps. And in terms of, some people often ask me if I'm running out of ideas for videos, and I actually am not. There's so many things going on, and there's so many people kind of contacting me, and developers, smaller and bigger developers, contacting me and kind of, oh, we have this plugin, can you have a look at that? We are doing this, can you have a look at that? So it's actually fairly easy to do, and it gives me something to essentially keep me occupied. That's really what it is.
It's really cool. It's really cool because I've seen that you have also gathered a lot of people in your Discord community, and there is such a nice vibe that sometimes I feel difficult to find this type of communities where everything is about helping one another and everything. So it's really I really appreciate that this exists, this community.
The Discord community is something I'm really proud of, it has started to really take on a life on its own. I'm kind of obviously still engaged with everything, and I'm looking at everything and kind of reading everything that's posted there. I might not kind of post constantly, but I'm reading everything, and it's really nice to see the people engage in a very friendly and helpful way. And I'm particularly thankful for all the companies that are kind of participating. You are participating on the Discord. Thomas Fiedler from Fiedler Audio is participating in the Discord, and I think it's just a good place. So if you guys out there want to contribute or kind of get in touch with other people
and learn a lot,
go to that community. And
do you know how many people there are?
Well, I mean, it depends on essentially how you count that, because the way the Discord community is set up is a lot of people just click on it and kind of see what it is in there. So I think there are currently about 2,000 people in there, something at that range. And there might be about 100 active users. So that's about where we are. But the ones that are active are very knowledgeable, and I actually plan to feature a couple of them. We recently did a video with the Ambisonics maker, Thorsten Michels, and that was a lot of fun. And I actually like to do a couple of those with some people on there, because they have so much to contribute.
Yeah, that's really cool. Is there anything that you expect to happen for immersive audio during 2026?
Oh, are you
expecting something like
that's a very interesting question. Because the one thing that kind of became clear over the last year is there's so much going on in the technology sphere, right? That the hype or the excitement about immersive audio has died down a little. That is, to me, people see this as a negative, but it's actually not the case. Usually when that happens, it means that things are starting to be adopted on a much more broader way. I just noticed when I fly over here to Athens that I was watching Netflix in immersive audio mode, and I didn't even notice. Right? It becomes commonplace, and I think that is interesting. I'm not really expecting anything in particular. It's going to be really interesting to see this new format that's coming out of China is interesting to me, because it's the first time that in that particular space there is a serious competition to Dolby Atmos, if not on a global scale, then at least in some part of the world. And Vivid Audio essentially does a couple of things that Dolby Atmos doesn't do. So it took all the things that Dolby Atmos is providing, and then added all the things that people wanted that Dolby Atmos provides. So it's actually really interesting. We will see how that affects the rest of the world. I think a lot of people can learn from what has been implemented there, but we will see. We will see.
It's funny because for the past 2 years, every time the year started, I will make a video just ranking the best DAWs to start with. And this year I didn't do it because there were so many technologies coming out, and I just didn't have the time to actually dig in any of them. Yeah. So I was like, I cannot do this. This is just too much. This is just too much time. Do you, whenever there is a technology coming out, do you actually have the time to sit down and go through it? And for example, Vivid Audio, did you sit down and check it out and actually live through it?
Yes and no, right? One thing that really helps you, and you probably kind of have the same experience, is that when you are deep involved in that type of technology, you start to get a certain sense how things work, right? It's not completely new to you anymore. So if you look at the Sony 360, the tools, the Wagner creator. Yes, it looks a little bit different, but the functionality is basically the same as everything else, right? So once you have understood how MPEG H works, you understand how Sony 360 RA works. And the same thing is with, I think it's actually called Audio Vivid, not Vivid Audio, but that's we will kind of fix that in post. in post. But sort of it's really, if you are familiar with Dolby Atmos, then that is nothing that is in there looks unfamiliar. It looks very, very familiar. It just adds a couple of features that Dolby Atmos doesn't have. So in that sense, you start to learn more on a general scale how these technologies work, so you can actually kind of learn them very, very quickly. So I never had an issue. And quite frankly, if there's a technology coming out that requires me to do a little bit more preparation, then kind of it usually takes me a longer time to create a video. But for most of these technologies, they're very straightforward once you understand how everything works.
Interesting. Well, I wish I could have the time to check on all these things, to do this video this year. Unfortunately, I just couldn't. There were so many things going on.
Yeah.
So many technologies.
I mean, you're working in the Ambisonics space,
yeah.
Right? So the Ambisonics space is sort of the mother of everything, right? So if you are familiar with Ambisonics, if you can work with Ambisonics, then everything else kind of falls into place to some extent.
I guess that the biggest problem with Ambisonics, it's not a problem, but it's like the biggest challenge with Ambisonics has always been to teach the engineer that there are no speakers, It is very difficult to grasp in the beginning. Yeah. I even remember myself when I started, getting my Rode microphones and everything, like the whole concept of the soundfield.
Yeah.
But once you marry this idea, I think you're good.
Yeah, it's kind of, and I think being a mathematician, that actually helped me because you're starting to understand that all you're really doing is you have this sound sphere, right? So this spherical kind of representation of the sound pressures around you, and what you're really doing is you're doing a representation with spherical harmonics. So it falls into place. But yes, I do agree that a lot of people have problems understanding. What does this mean now? Kind of because we are so much attuned to the idea that there is a speaker, and then there is a signal going to that speaker and the sound coming out of the speaker, and you don't have that with Ambisonics because it's completely speaker agnostic.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's a challenge for many people. That's true.
Yeah. I guess that, it could be interesting to see if we ever see a way of converting an Ambisonic signal to an object, perhaps.
I mean, a lot of people have kind of thought about that, and kind of there's actually something that a lot of people talk to me because they sort of miss this idea of having objects in Ambisonics, but from the very nature of the representation, it just doesn't have that, because what it really is just a mathematical representation of the sound pressure around the listener.
You have had a very long career. Like when I picked you up at the hotel, we were talking in the car and everything, and I was kind of digging on your background and everything. It's been really interesting, your life, You've been back and forth, Europe, America.
Yeah. No, I sometimes jokingly, it's not really a joke, but sort of I actually had had 4 different academic careers.
Amazing.
I started out as a mathematician and then moved into computer science. And from computer science into educational technology, and then from educational technology in my current field, which is digital media, with a special focus on game design, really. And that's sort of where the immersive audio comes in, through the game design. And I always was interested in, one of the things that bothered me about academia in particular, when you are at the university, is this very narrow focus that everybody has. My PhD thesis was actually in theoretical robotics, and I presented at these conferences about theoretical robotics. And then after a couple of conferences, you start to realize it's always the same 20 people, right? so you've reached a field where things are so narrow that you only have a few people that are interested in what you're doing, and that to me was boring. So I very early decided that I'm actually much more interested in everything else that's going on. That's why I moved from one field to the next. Now, the disadvantage of doing it that way, that you never really become that recognized, right? So in academia, having this super focus is actually an advantage, because then you become the super guru in this particular field. I never had the chance to do that, but I found it much more interesting, right? So here right now, for example, in Athens, I'm at a humanities conference. So people talking about Greek philosophers and Aristotle and Socrates and all these types of things, and having presentations that are given in a completely different way than I would normally experience in a computer science field. I find that fascinating, kind of looking on the other side of the fence, and kind of looking what other people are doing and how they're actually approaching knowledge creation. That was always something that interested me. So I have a very diverse background, a lot of different things, which I can recommend that, honestly, because I think it gives you a better perspective of the world. But it's not necessarily something that allows you to become super important in academia.
Nah, but it's not. I don't think it's that important at some point in somebody's life. It's
true. I mean, it's.
I love it that you can be a communicator more than anything else, because one thing is in the academia where you create these ideas, but other ways is when you communicate these ideas to people that are not related.
Yeah, it's actually one of the more interesting things, and we talked about when we drove over here that most of my current research is actually in artificial intelligence and how you use artificial intelligence in an educational environment, or better said, how education has to change in order to adapt to the sort of the requirements that artificial intelligence is putting on society. And the thing that I find interesting in the discussions that I have with fellow people in education is that most of them don't really understand the fine nuances, because they are not really exposed to the different disciplines. I was a computer scientist at some point. I was a mathematician at some point. I actually published a research paper on neural networks 30 years ago. I see things in a different way, and this broad perspective, I think, is necessary. So I can in the same academic paper, I can talk about philosophical approaches from different Greek philosophers, but at the same time also be very, very detailed about research in neural networks and computer science and mathematics and everything around it. And I think it does help you. It does help you. But once again, if you are in academia, one thing that you need to realize is that most people, or pretty much all people in academia, are very, very specialized. So if you it might seem that kind of people think that I'm really kind of well known in immersive audio. This is not the case, because if I would show up in an immersive audio conference, some people might recognize me from my YouTube channel, but that's pretty much it. I don't have that cloud that people have who spend all their life in academia in immersive audio. I don't have that. And if you're going that route, you need to be aware that that is something you have to deal with, right? in every conference that I go to, I'm always the odd one. So I'm always the eclectic one, the one that comes from a different field and is now kind of doing things. But I always enjoyed that.
That's interesting because, now that you were talking about these different perspectives on one thing, it touches me on the way that when I started my career, much shorter than yours, I did in the arts. Like I had no relation to computer science. I studied music. All I wanted to do was do music, and then I became a sound engineer, and then I started to be a sound designer. But so when I started like sampling instruments, and then when I started doing plugins, all my focus has always been from the side of the artist, kind of, and not from the side of the developer, the person who studied computer science. And this is something that also happens to me when I go and meet somebody who is a developer, is like, or somebody who is like specialized in Ambisonics and everything. I don't really have much to say about the theory. Because I feel that I am on the other side. Yeah. I am in the holistic part of it. It's interesting. Yeah.
You're constantly challenged by people who kind of spend their entire life in one particular kind of area, and that it's something you get used to. I think I probably would do the same thing again, because it's much more rewarding to kind of really understand how everything works. And as I sometimes say, I still don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. So there's still so many things that I want to kind of experience and kind of learn about, and immersive audio being one of them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I really dig that. Yeah, because I really feel like kind of the same way. Yeah, I feel that I'm lucky in that way, because I can actually see from the artistic point of view, but then I can actually write code. I don't consider myself somebody like a computer scientist, a coder or whatever. I'm far from it. But somehow it gets done. It works. Like communication. Yeah. I feel that we're lucky on that way. Yeah.
I think we are lucky, kind of being on that intersection between different things. I also noticed that, and this is actually one of the things, and also something that we talked about when we came over, that your plugins also have a different feel to it. It becomes clear that these plugins are made by somebody who is an artist, right? So who knows how these things work. One of the big frustrations that I quite often have, and that I sometimes express in my videos, lightly but still, is that a lot of developers don't really understand how artists work, and they focus so much on the functionality without allowing their plugins to really be usable in a way that makes them more than just kind of functional tools, right?
Yeah.
And your plugins are a little bit different in that respect. So it's not like just a couple of knobs that you can turn.
Yeah.
There is actually there's more thought that goes into that.
Yeah. I know that there are plenty of controls that I could actually offer, but no. Let's just keep it simple. Some things should do something else, and everything is automatable. Whatever is automatable can be automated. Yeah. I believe so. Yeah. It's the shortcut.
the kind of that, and kind of the plugins are really good. The Melder production plugins, right? So they are really, really good. But they're sort of the Melder production is a developer who is essentially exposing every parameter that there is to the interface.
Which is really useful as well.
Which can be really useful, but it's a very engineering type of approach, right? So I always found it difficult to work with those plugins. Some swear by it. I like it much better if there's some thought that is put into the interface and how everything works, and making it usable in a creative way and not only in a functional way.
That's cool. That's awesome. Do you do music in your free time as well?
Not anymore. Not anymore. Well, free time is a different.
Aside from the YouTube videos, from the channel, from the Discord.
Yeah. And what most people don't know, I actually published a lot of academic articles last year. So I actually published close to 20 academic articles last year and 2 books. And and then I have a blog that where I publish weekly. So yeah, free time. I used to be trained in classical piano.
Oh wow!
I was actually pretty good at it. So good, in fact, that my piano teacher tried to convince me to also become a piano teacher.
No way.
Yeah, but don't ask me to play anything because I haven't played for 30 years.
Do you miss it?
I every once in a while I start playing again. It's actually quite interesting. You don't lose there are certain capabilities you don't lose, right? So I still need to relearn certain things whenever I kind of start again. But it's not that I'm starting at level zero, right? So kind of there are certain things that come very natural. But yeah, do I miss it? Sometimes, right? And then I'm starting to kind of fiddle around again a little bit, but I'm nowhere near where I was when I was 18. Kind of at the age of 18, there was no piano piece that was too complicated for me. I could play everything. Nowadays,
So cool.
it's just not the same.
Yeah.
But it's a craft, like it's an art form, right? So you need to train that. You need to be constantly exposed to it. If you don't do that continuously, you eventually kind of lose that high level of competence.
Yeah, the skill is lost. Yeah, same happened to me. Like I finished my studies. I was supposed to have studied jazz guitar, and then I came to Greece, and 18 years later my guitar is there hanging and haven't had the time. But that's true. Like every time I grab it, I can remember the chord changes and everything. But and
the piano, it's actually quite interesting. Kind of the chords is something that you memorize naturally. I found that very fascinating. It's almost impossible for me to not kind of land a chord. It's almost like the fingers are kind of doing their own thing and kind of so. That is one thing I think that you don't lose, kind of the ability to immediately recognize what are the configurations, the finger configurations that actually give me a nice chord. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, music works in a different way. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, that's everything for today. Thanks again, Alejandro, for this very nice tour of your studio. I really enjoyed being here. And for all of you out there, I highly recommend subscribing to Alejandro's channel. It's really important that you stay updated with all the things that Alejandro is doing, because I think Audio Brewers is one of the best developers in the Ambisonics market.
Thank you.
And so promise me that you're going to subscribe, and obviously you're also going to subscribe to my channel if you have not already done so. And with that being said, see you all in the next video.
Cheers.